Hey everyone, welcome to Locked On Lakers for Monday. Brian Kamenetsky, Andy Kamenetsky. Andy, the 4-game winning streak is no more.
And not Brian, because it's a 5-game winning streak.
That is true. That would have made it better, but it's not. The Lakers lose on Sunday night 127-119 in a game that wasn't nearly that close when all the important players were playing. We'll break that one down and talk a little bit about Russell Westbrook's mood. All that coming up.
About time we talk a little Russ on this show.
You are Locked On Lakers, your daily Los Angeles Lakers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Want to thank everybody for making Locked On Lakers your first listen of every day. We get this thing up for you Monday through Friday, and sometimes even on Saturday, as we did over the last weekend. Really appreciate all the support for the podcast. We want you to be able to get to this show anytime you need it, no matter when it is that you're accessing your podcast. So make another Locked On podcast your second listen of every day, but after making us your first listen. Andy, Russell Westbrook is looking uncomfortable. And so we'll talk about that, but let's start with Sunday's game, Sunday's loss. It was an ugly affair for three and a third quarters or whatever until the end of the bench made it a kind of a thing. I was asked last week when I was doing Spectrum, the Lakers cable station, some of their programming there,
Spectrum Sportsnet,
what I thought the Lakers win streak would ultimately end at. I said 4 games, and I was heckled and called a hater and, oh, come on, man. But I had to see it. I had to see them get through Atlanta and then beat a good Memphis team before I would get on board with the idea that they're going to streak their way through some of the good teams on their schedule. Turns out I was correct. Does this game on Sunday change for you how you feel about the win streak, how you feel about the team, anything like that?
Not necessarily. I mean, we both talked about on Friday's mini podcast, the one we recorded after Friday's win over Atlanta came out on Saturday, about how the 4-game winning streak could give you some reasons for optimism with this team, just in terms of them actually being able to have some continuity, them actually being able to build on some stuff, starting to lean into a very specific identity, and everybody seemed on board with it. Mm-hmm. And even though they beat 4 sub-500 teams, A, the Lakers have been a sub-500 team for different parts of the season, and B, this is what you're supposed to be doing, whether you are a great team, whether you are a solid team, whether you're a team trying to find itself, whatever, you are supposed to be taking advantage of opportunities like that 4 games in a row against sub-500 teams. So the Lakers handling what they were supposed to be doing during that period, I do think carries some significance. And both of us talked again about that reason for some degree of optimism. Mm-hmm. But there's a reason that neither one of us declared the Lakers back, baby. Because we both said
they're not fixed.
Well, we both said like they're going to be going up against a very good Memphis team, and they had played them recently and built up a 13-point lead against them, which was indicative of an ability at the top of their game to play with very good teams. But as we also said, they had very little to no margin for error, and in this game, Brian, a lot of errors.
Yeah, many. This is a process that is going to be a few steps forward with one back, a few forward. Hopefully, if they get where they're going, it's going to be because they've taken steps backwards. It's to use the word, a process. It's not going to be clicking into place and moving along. So for me, I don't feel like this changes fundamentally anything I felt about what they did over those 4 games or necessarily what they could be doing going forward. But you talk about errors, Andy. Good God. I mean, LeBron James, very few from him. 35 points, 14 of 19 from the floor, 3 of 4 from three-point range. He had 9 rebounds. He had 7 assists. He only had 3 turnovers. He was doing work, and he was phenomenal. The problem was, Andy, that the rest of the team, until you got to, end of the bench time with Wayne Ellington hitting his first 6 shots coming in the late in the fourth quarter, and all that, like everybody else disappeared in this game. Avery Bradley. Well, Avery Bradley came back to earth, 2 of 10. Malik Monk, 3 of 13. He had been incredibly hot. Stanley Johnson, not a profound offensive player, only 1 of 4. Off the bench, Carmelo Anthony was 2 of 8. Like, that's a lot of empty. And we'll get to Russ, who was 2 of 12. So, I mean, that's a lot of inefficiency around one guy.
Yeah, to put this, I think, really even more specific perspective, because really the first 3 quarters are what matter. The fourth quarter, the Laker reserves got the Lakers back into the game. Memphis put the starters back in. I don't think they were really worried they were going to lose this game, but you can't not put your starters back in at that point. I think if you're Memphis,
you can't screw up. But look, I mean, the Lakers lost by 8. Had they not been down by 26 or whatever it is, they'd have lost the game by 17. Because Memphis would have played a regular rotation.
But in the first 3 quarters of the game, LeBron had 32 points. Next closest was THT with 11, but it was a very front-loaded 11. He scored 8 of his 11 points in the first quarter. From there, Malik Monk, Melo, and Avery Bradley, 7 points. Put it another way, LeBron had 32 points after 3 quarters. The rest of the team, 51. Like,
it's just not enough balance. Yeah.
That's just not going to get it done. The Lakers had 6 turnovers in the third quarter. So on top of the scoring issues that they had, the third quarter was the one where they really started turning the ball over, and that's when the game really started getting away from them. And on top of it too, Brian, you know how many fast break points they had in this game? 0.
That's not enough.
No, 0. And only, by the way, 5 what were classified by the box score gurus, 5 attempts. Only 5 fast break attempts in this game.
Part of the reason, Andy, that they didn't get a lot of fast break opportunities is because Memphis, for most of the game, was shooting around 60%.
Indeed.
So it is very difficult to get fast breaks when you are taking the ball out of your own basket. Particularly, Memphis didn't turn the ball over, only 12 turnovers. Lakers turnovers were not the overarching problem for the Lakers on the night. They only had 12. But when Memphis is a good defensive team, so they weren't, when they're not turning the ball over, so there aren't any empty possessions there, extra possessions for the Lakers there, and they're shooting 60%. So I don't see where the fast break opportunities are supposed to come in a scenario like that. So it was one of these nights, and kind of to stay with this, it's like, to some degree, it's going to happen. Malik Monk, who I absolutely 100% think is emerging as a legitimate scorer on this team, and I don't think he's not going to shoot 56% for the rest of the season, but I think the idea of Malik Monk as an important frontline scorer on this team is not a mirage. It's not something that's automatically going to go away. But even really good scorers have 3 of 13 nights. Like, was due for one of these types of nights. Actually, I thought made up for it with some surprisingly, particularly in the first half, surprisingly good defense. He had 3 block shots in this game.
Yeah,
but like you're going to see nights like this where players come back to earth, but it shows the vulnerability to me of a very fragile Lakers offense once you start to get up against better defensive teams like Memphis.
Yeah, I mean, especially when you don't have Anthony Davis, and Westbrook is really struggling. I think over the last few weeks, on balance, he's been struggling with his scoring, struggling with his finishing. And you mentioned like Monk, and you and I have both praised him a lot over the last couple of weeks. I agree with you. What we've been seeing from him is not a mirage, but I mean, Malik Monk is a scorer. I mean, that's what he has been doing in the league and what's considered his best strengths. But it's important to remember, even though he is a talented scorer, and I think he's a very creative scorer, I think he's somebody that can score from a lot of different parts of the floor. He is not an established, reliable scorer for a team like this with this type of aspirations. He has not established himself like that.
There's no evidence that Malik Monk can produce on a team with ambition as a scorer on 7 of 10 nights, which is what you expect from frontline scorer.
Right. Which, by the way, doesn't mean that by the end of this season, it won't feel like he's established it. I want to make sure that's clear. I'm not saying that, Malik Monk is going to be some type of roller coaster ride for the season, or, he's not built for this or whatever. I'm just saying he has not established himself as that guy yet. So I think it can be out over your skis for anybody, including both of us, to start feeling like he's arrived, because I just don't think the sample size, both this season and also for his career, is there. It doesn't mean
Which just
that
depends.
he's not
I mean, to
valuable.
some degree, it depends on what you mean by arrived. Like, good player can produce, nice and be like nightly and be a something more than he was in Charlotte. I think he's arrived. Good player, like, oh, you got on your hands a 22 a night guy. No, got to see a little more than that.
Right.
So there are a few more things from Sunday's game that really stuck out, both on the offensive side and the defensive side. Plus, LeBron had some interesting stuff to say about where the Lakers are at the halfway point, and how he feels going forward into the official second half of the season. We'll talk about that next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by Built Bar. We are now in 2022, January to be specific. So that means everybody's into their New Year's resolutions. And if you are like a lot of people and yours is about getting fit or getting healthier, you got to make sure Built Bar is part of that plan. Built Bar is the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar better than some candy bars. And you're going to want to eat healthy, but you don't want it to get boring, because if that happens after a few weeks, you're just going to say, screw it, man. I want my chocolate. Well, guess what? Built Bars, they are covered in 100% chocolate, real chocolate. And most of them contain just 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, but 17 grams of protein. That's the good stuff. A lot of great flavors to choose from. Coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, salted caramel, mint brownie, cookies and cream, tons and tons of options. So go to Built.com, use the promo code LOCK15, get 15% off your order. Again, promo code LOCK15, get 15% off at Built.com.
So, Andy, there were two super fun things that happened at Crypto.com Arena on Sunday during Sunday's loss to the Grizzlies, 127-119 again. The first was Ja Morant's block catch thing, where his elbow was up at the box.
Oh, my God.
There's almost a 0% chance that if you're listening to this if you're listening to this podcast, you're a basketball fan. If you're a basketball fan, there's a 0% chance you haven't seen this clip. He is, hey, the Lakers held him down. He typically scores 40 against the Lakers, only 16 on Sunday. Ja Morant is absolutely 100% unequivocally one of the most entertaining players that you can possibly find in any sport anywhere. I love him and his giraffe.
Yeah, I've said many times, and for people unaware, the Memphis Zoo has a baby giraffe that they named Giraffe after Ja Morant. There's videos you can find of Ja visiting his giraffe. They are absolutely adorable.
He's getting all grown up now. I mean, the kids, they grow up real fast these days. It's been a couple years since that.
Ja or giraffe?
Both.
Okay. Well, I wasn't
both.
Sure. I've said this a few times on this show, Ryan. I've actually said it a few times over the last couple of years. Ja's my favorite young player in the league. He is so much fun to watch. He is absolutely fearless on the court. Like, as much as I would love for him to be #future Laker, there's a part of me that wants him to be a Grizzly for life, because I just think that's actually a cooler story, particularly with this young group that he's leading right now. And he's somebody that entered the league. He's a lot like Damian Lillard, like just knowing how to lead. Like Chris Paul was like this.
They're just sort of magnetic. There are certain people who are just kind of magnetic.
Like LeBron was like
guy.
that. Like guys who just enter the league knowing how to get even older players to follow him. I mean, don't get me wrong. If he becomes a #future Laker, like in reality, I ain't going to send him away.
And the Grizzlies don't have that many players who are older than him.
Yeah,
they're a bunch of babies over there.
But it's just he is such a special player, and he is so just incredibly entertaining.
Yeah, and one reason that a potential 4-5 matchup between the Lakers and Grizzlies would be really, really fun basketball, should it actually get to that, and it's certainly very possible.
Feels more fun for Grizzlies fans right now.
I think Grizzlies fans would feel confident going into that matchup, and rightly so.
If I'm being fully transparent, Brian,
is there, Andy? Let's be in the interest of transfer. Is there a top 4 team in the West that Lakers fans should feel confident going into a 7-game series with? I would say no.
Only the ones that haven't played yet.
But we have the entire second half of the season to change that. The other fun thing was Flea taking part in the halftime skills challenge.
Yes.
I don't know if he won. I don't even remember how that works, but that was go find that. So 2 fun things.
Yeah, friend of the show wearing, by the way, an autographed THT jersey.
That's right. So go find that. Those are the 2 fun things that happened on Sunday. Notice neither one of those things really had much to do with the Lakers. I guess you could put LeBron's 35 in there as well, but he was so angry at the rest of the team for the way it was playing. You posted, I thought it was an excellent meme of LeBron's post-game speech to the rest of his teammates, and it was the scene of Eddie Murphy as the barber in Coming to America. Bleep you, bleep you, bleep you. Who's next?
Yeah, I'm just picturing LeBron, Brian, lining up everyone. And just saying, bleep you, bleep you, bleep you.
Yep. Who's next?
And they would deserve it.
They would, because as we mentioned, Russell Westbrook and Avery Bradley and Malik Monk and Carmelo Anthony were a combined 9 of the 22 plus 13 is 36 plus 8, 44. That's not good. And so there's a fragility to this team offensively. As much progress as I do think that they are making with this offense, and LeBron at center and leaning into going small and finding this identity. I would say the more disappointing thing is they got absolutely carved up by Memphis. The 2 are not unrelated, as we like to point out. Phil Jackson like to point out. Coaches like to point out. Bad offense leads to bad defense. You miss a lot of shots. You give people a lot of opportunities to go do stuff and go score. But they looked as shaky defensively, I thought, on Sunday as they have in a while.
Well, to put this in perspective, Brian, again, the first 3 quarters, because I think those were the ones that really mattered. Memphis shot 48%, just a shade under 48% from behind the arc, and had scored 52 points in the paint. So they were, it's hard to
them down from mid-range, though, let me tell you.
And they had gotten to the line by then 21 times. I guess, thankfully for the Lakers, if they were trying to fool themselves into thinking that they could make a comeback, they only shot 67% from the line during that period. Ja got to the line 10 times, made 7 of them. So any way you slice it, inside, outside, driving to the rim, whatever, they were destroying the Lakers. I can't even begin to think about how many times Memphis not just hit threes, but threes that were inexplicably wide open. Like in the first half, I was like, guys, I know that I don't know as much about basketball as you all. You make your living doing it. You might want to guard Desmond Bane in the corner. I'm just a little bit of advice. Take with this what you will.
Well, I mean, in fairness to them, you look at the guy and he's got those big, very bulky but T-Rex arms. My theory is that the minute that they realized that THT was going to come off the assembly line with arms that were too long, they just took they invented Desmond Bane to try to compensate and put the world back in order. It's a team with a lot of really, really good players. Maybe not a ton of stars after Ja, but a lot of really good players. But
give Desmond Bane a little time. He's really
could
good.
Be. You never know. I mean, Jaren Jackson Jr. still got potential. They're very young.
Yeah.
I hate that it kind of comes back to this all the time. But we've spent last week, as Malik Monk was ascending as a scorer, noting that when he scores the way that he does, it's a great thing for the Lakers because it takes the pressure off of Westbrook to be a scorer. On Sunday, though, when Monk wasn't cooking, and they weren't getting the random 16 points in the first half from Bradley or whatever it was, the other night, and Melo 2 of 8, you're not getting. The focus goes back to not just is Russell Westbrook turning the ball over, but is he also providing scoring when they need it? And the answer was no. He's missing starting to miss a frightening amount, I think, at the rim in terms of finishing plays and stuff like that. And after the game, seemed a little down. So we'll talk about it. He's never got to LeBron mentioned. We'll try to get that in there as well. But let's talk about all that stuff next.
Locked On Lakers brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline wants to wish you a happy new betting year as they continue the march to the playoffs and beyond. BetOnline remains the number one spot for all the best sports wagering action in 2022. It's a new year and a new updated desktop and mobile website. To sign up today, receive your 50% welcome bonus on the first deposit. Just use the promo code Locked On to get started. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right down to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. Bet Online, the fastest, easiest way to wager on all your favorite sports. Bet Online, where the games start.
So if you go back over the last 5 games for Westbrook, you even go back to the Memphis game where they blew the lead, the road game. 5 turnovers in that game, 4 against Portland through the win streak, 9 against Minnesota, 0 against Sacramento, 3 against Atlanta, 0 on Sunday against Memphis. So that 9 turnover game over the last 5 is really the outlier, and has done a much better job taking care of the ball. And that is a huge part of what was complicating things with the Lakers earlier this season, was just way too many turnovers. At the same time, he is, I think, being pretty responsible with his shot volume. He had 12 against Memphis, 14 against Atlanta, Sacramento, 19, 16 against Minnesota, 10 against Portland, 16 in that, go back again to that Memphis game. So the volume, a lot of the sort of the base numbers on Westbrook are what you would kind of want them to be. I don't think anybody wants him shooting 22, 23 times a game. But you are starting to notice he's shooting 37% from the field in January. And there is he's got to be better than that. Again, particularly if they're not on nights where they're not getting those big superstar performances from other people who may or may not be superstars.
Well, I mean, here's the thing.
He's just saying he's missing so much at the rim.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. We had talked about, this ascendance of Malik Young.
No, that's fair. After what the influence of Nick Young on Malik Monk, to call him Malik Young, I think is absolutely appropriate.
Thank you. Good save. We had talked about this ascendance of
I'm here for you.
Of Malik Monk, the heavily influenced by Nick Young and his tattooing advice, Malik Monk, as a scorer over these last couple weeks. But there's still a baseline with Russ. Even if you saw Monk as the number 2 guy, you can't have Russell Westbrook regularly scoring in single digits and expect to have enough offense. Whether you consider Russell Westbrook still an all-star caliber player or a shade below all-star, something like that, there is still an expectation and a necessity for him on this team the way it's constructed. I would say that's still the case even when Anthony Davis comes back. When the Lakers were winning championships with Kobe and Pau and those guys, whether Andrew Bynum was considered the 3rd scorer on those teams, or Lamar Odom, or I guess some nights Ron Artest, there still was a baseline you needed from all of those guys with scoring if they wanted to be regularly successful, even if you knew Kobe was the number 1 guy, Pau was the number 2 guy, and you could pretty much rely on both of those guys like clockwork to get what you needed scoring. There's a standard. And with Westbrook, particularly as a guy attacking the rim, because that's supposed to be the area where you feel like he's least vulnerable, because that the outside shot is at best going to come and go. And there will be nights.
I mentioned, just to throw this in there, I mentioned the responsibility of his shot selection. He's taken 2 3-pointers in the last 3 games.
Sure. The outside shot, though, is not something he's going to be able to rely on. And there are occasionally nights where that, elbow jumper off the glass looks good, and there are nights like he had against Memphis where he shot one that almost went over the backboard. So that is not something that you're going to feel comfortable about from Russ regularly. So if he's struggling,
he shot it at the spot Ja hit when he had that block shot.
Yeah, I mean, when he is struggling regularly to convert layups, you start getting nervous. You just do.
And I think, this concept of Russ needs to be Russ, that other players say, that he says, and what exactly does that mean? The classic dilemma with Westbrook is that if you are not a Westbrook believer, that you have to allow Russ to be kind of the 100% Russ for him to be as good as he can be, to be, to put up the numbers, to be as influential, to all that stuff. The problem with that is if you allow it, you can't win. So it's like, that is the essential, Cliff Notes version of the criticism of Westbrook as a foundational player. And so the Lakers are trying to figure out how to you allow him to be the best, use the best parts of him, but still limit the other stuff. And he's always a little chippy with the media. That's not unusual, but he just seems frustrated with more about the process, not just the questions of how are you fitting in.
Yeah, I mean, I remember this was something we discussed a couple weeks ago when there was one of those "let Russ be Russ," what does it all mean type questions posed to him, and he talked pretty at length, and I thought with a fair amount of disgust, frankly, about getting mixed messages from coaches in terms of his role, at times from teammates, like not knowing exactly what he's supposed to be doing. He's talked recently about at times running the offense, at times hanging out in the dunker spot. And I thought it was really interesting after this game tonight against Memphis, Dave McMenamin from ESPN started to ask him a question that really was meant to get Russ to talk about Ja Morant and the game that he had. But he said, as a point guard, and he was trying to set it up basically as a, point guard to point guard, comparison appreciation type thing. Because with Russ, you often have to massage these questions. And Russ started laughing just at the as a point guard thing, which I took to mean his interpretation. This is just me. Maybe I'm wrong. But as somebody who's been trying to study Russ a lot this season, I thought he was scoffing in some ways, like the idea of I'm even being used as a point guard regularly, or I'm really even doing the thing that I'm supposed to be doing.
I kind of initially was like, oh, he laughed because he thought it was another one of these, oh, here's somebody going to explain to me what I'm supposed to be doing as a point guard in the offense. But you're right, your interpretation of it is just as actually better. Even if it's right or wrong, it's better than mine and more intriguing and not out of the question because Russ is a really smart guy.
It's growing more and more obvious that he is really unhappy with the way he's being used on this team, that he does not feel that he is being, used to his fullest capabilities, like you talked about earlier, really unleashed. And you can debate whether Russ is correct or not about this in terms of the overall composition on this team. Both of us, I think, would agree he's wrong in terms of the way he fits in overall.
Russ in full bloom is not what the team needs.
Well, it's not what the team needs. It also doesn't really make sense with this roster.
It doesn't work because if you this was the argument against having it was like the playoffs is like the more Russ has the ball in the playoffs, the less LeBron has the ball in the playoffs.
But even the overarching question beyond that, Brian, whether you think Russ has a point, sort of a point, no point at all, the overarching thing to me is a moody Russell Westbrook is a bad thing. He is not a guy because his presence is big. He is not somebody that you want looming and unhappy.
It is always easier, and we'll save the LeBron because LeBron stuff is actually, I think, a little bit related to this in terms because he was asked and talked about where he feels like the team is halfway through the season, how much he feels he understands and knows the team and all that. And I think in an effort to really be optimistic and talk about like, hey, there's a lot of hope in the future. Talked about how comfortable he is with what they have. They've gotten a few games most of their rotation there. What they don't know is like, what does this look like with AD? Primarily, you mentioned Kendrick Nunn, but and the return of AD as a potential to elevate this team is super important, but it has a massive effect on Westbrook's role too. It is always hard to figure out where guys will be when it comes to actually doing the stuff that they talk about doing in the offseason. And the danger for this team and this franchise has always been what happens if they don't win, because losing games makes things complicated. And they're 21-20 halfway through the season. Russell Westbrook, the arc is sort of getting better, but not in the way that it needs to be. It's pretty clear that a lot of people's worst concerns over his fit and how it was going to work, and everyone's happiness in
whether it's even worth bothering to try this.
Right. It just is. These are very smart basketball players. They're very smart people, and they see, if we can see what some of the problems are, they are 2 or 3 or 5 miles ahead of the rest of us. That doesn't mean they can't solve them, doesn't mean they can't fix it, find a way around it on the sheer force of their talent. But Westbrook, to your point, Andy, it certainly seems very possible that he is both upset with sort of how he feels like he's being used, but then also too, how he is the focal point for the blame for the fact that things aren't going right. Because that's a difficult thing. Well, what do you expect? Like, you're going to blame me for things not being the way they ought to be. I'm not being able to play the way that I've always played, to do the things that make me the Russell Westbrook that was a superstar, Hall of Famer, top 75. And you can start to sort of see that resentment. I am not close enough to these guys in the most literal sense, like, because we're not really allowed to get close to them, to know, oh, it's a problem in the locker room. It's like, not going there. It just, the mood isn't one of great happiness. Even with the Westbrook caveat of he's never particularly happy when he has to talk to us.
And look, it's worth pointing out, Russ, AD, LeBron together without a center. The sample size on this is small, obviously, because of all the stuff we've talked about all season, but it's good. So there is always a chance, I think a very realistic chance, that once AD gets back, and knock on wood, they don't have any more setbacks with injury, the three of them can play very well together. Some of these problems go to the side, and the things that we're talking about right now don't linger as an issue. I completely believe that is a possibility. For the period that we're in right now, though, it is something that has me a bit concerned, because you don't know when AD is coming back.
Yeah, that's fair. He did, if you missed it, saw some of the footage, he was on the court shooting before Sunday's game, wearing a brace on that knee. So, he's getting there. Frank Vogel said the update is the same. They will not give an update until 4 weeks. I want to thank everybody for making Locked On Lakers first listen of every day, and make another Locked On podcast your second listen. And we'll see everybody on Tuesday.